In my Final Fantasy XIV video, I brought up the fact that Final Fantasy XIV was not the only MMORPG set in the Final Fantasy universe. Fast forward about a year now, and here I am finally talking about Final Fantasy XI, Square's first title in the MMORPG genre with the series. 11 released all the way back in 2002, initially on the PlayStation 2, essentially becoming the first major console MMORPG to date, besides maybe EverQuest Adventures. However, in the West, this would become largely obscure as the PlayStation 2's network equipment, including the LAN adapter, network disk, and hard drive, were really just not common to the general audience back then. Not to mention online gaming on consoles was still in its infancy. I remember coming across the PlayStation 2 Final Fantasy XI bundle only once as a kid, but I remember that I wanted to play it so badly, but unfortunately my parents would have never paid for something so expensive, let alone something that had a monthly subscription. Regardless, 11 would eventually come to the PC later that year, also supporting cross-play functionality with PlayStation 2's players alongside PC players. Hell, there was even an Xbox 360 version that I personally bought and played during its heyday. Now, obviously during the modern era of MMORPGs, most people's eyes are going to be on Final Fantasy XIV, but 11 is still very playable to this day, having its 18th birthday earlier this year. 18 years is a long time for a game to be active. The game is old and pretty archaic compared to what else is on the market, so I can't exactly blame anyone for skipping out on this title. Still though, nowadays, not many people talk about this pioneer in the MMORPG genre. Sure, there are some dedicated YouTubers that still do guides and such, and every now and then you'll have a big name like Maximilian Dude make a video on it. But by far my favorite video has to be by Happy Console Gamer. His video on Final Fantasy XI still makes me jealous to this day of how he describes just playing hours and hours with his friends, while I, on the other hand, couldn't get anyone in my friend group to even look at the damn thing. Shoot, even now in 2020, as I was playing the game for this video, I still couldn't get any of my friends to hop into the world of Vana'diel with me. Now, why is that?
Because it sucks. Because it sucks.
No, the game isn't bad or anything, it just has a lot of dated design flaws. Many of its systems haven't aged well. Things like slow menu navigation and combat both feel very dated by 2020 standards. Still, I would argue against calling this a bad game.
You don't have any friends. Nobody likes you.
Leave me alone.
After playing the game for a solid week or so and getting a good feel of it, it's finally time to talk about one of the longest standing MMORPGs on the market, Final Fantasy XI, and discuss if you should give the game a try. Final Fantasy XI is a traditional MMORPG. Much like older MMORPGs like World of Warcraft, to begin playing you first need to purchase the game and set up a credit card for monthly payments, which run around $12 a month. And this doesn't include extra service fees like character slots, bank slots, world transfers, etc. The current bundle that includes everything you will need plus a month of membership is the Ultimate Collection, which costs around $30, which isn't too bad, but see, the thing is... Okay, so you know how I said things are pretty dated with this game?
Go on.
Well, creating an account, signing up for the game, buying the game, paying for membership, paying for a character slot, and downloading the game itself is an incredibly frustrating ordeal, unless you go with the Steam version, which I can only assume is much easier to get an account started with. The story of Final Fantasy XI is, The story of Final Fantasy XI is pretty all over the place, since you can experience different storylines all at the same time, since the expansions don't necessarily play in order. A quick summary of the story would be, you as the player create a character that is a citizen of the three major cities, Bastok, Sandoria, and Windurst. Each nation must unite against the central antagonist, which is known as the Shadow Lord. The other story expansions cover different timelines, continents, and areas all within the world of Vana'diel. Character creation is pretty bare bones, but literally for 2002, new? This is actually pretty great. There is 5 total races to play as, each with various strengths and weaknesses. Humes are your standard human race, having a balance in the various attributes. Elvan is your elf race that have, strangely enough, higher strength, vitality, and health pools than other races. Next is the Taru, which is the magical race that look like small little dwarf-like creatures. The Mithra is the female-only cat feline race that have slightly higher agility and dexterity. And finally, the Gulka, a purely male race with high strength. Each race can largely play any class they want, as the small bonus stats you gain from your race will ultimately be minimal in the long run anyways, so it's recommended to just play what you want. Once you pick your character's race and looks, you can then pick your starting class or job, as it's called in this game, from the 6 available. The starting jobs are Warrior, White Mage, Black Mage, Red Mage, Monk, and Thief. Each class has different strengths and weaknesses and can perform different roles within combat. For instance, the Warrior can be a decent starting tank job for group dungeons, as they can wear heavy armor with high defense and shields. Now, oddly enough, unlike other MMORPGs, each class isn't necessarily defined by a role. Some classes have tons of utility. Certain jobs are dedicated buffers or debuffers. Certain ones specialize in dealing status effects or changing the status of enemies. Others can help increase the odds of drops from enemies. Each job brings something to the table that another cannot, which makes Final Fantasy XI's job system one of the better class lists in comparison to other games. This is coupled by the fact that there is even more customization when you introduce the sub-jobbing feature. Once you get to a certain point in the game, aside from your main job, let's say Warrior, you can then slot another job as your sub-job, gaining half the levels of that job in addition to its abilities. So for instance, let's say my Warrior level is 40 and I choose Red Mage as my sub-job. Effectively, my build would consist of 40 Warrior levels and 20 Red Mage levels. Granted that I've leveled my Red Mage to that job level, as you will have to level each and every single job separately. Even further past the initial 6 job classes are the unlockable jobs that you can gain from quests that you can take part in. The other classes include Paladin, Dark Knight, Beastmaster, Bard, Ranger, Samurai, Ninja, Dragoon, Summoner, Blue Mage, Corsair, Puppet Master, Dancer, Scholar, Geomancer, and lastly, the Rune Fencer. The gameplay of Final Fantasy XI boils down to experiencing the story scenarios, exploring the massive world of Vana'diel, completing quests or missions, and leveling and mastering all jobs while getting the best equipment for them. Combat in Final Fantasy XI will feel incredibly dated if you've played basically anything post-2002. Essentially, combat in its simplest form has you targeting an enemy, choosing to attack the enemy, drawing your weapon, getting within range to attack the enemy, and then rinse and repeat, which is a lot of extra steps. For the most part, the combat can be ultimately described as a tab target system in its infancy. The UI will show no abilities or icons you can click to perform them. Rather, you either have to navigate menus or learn macros to map onto your macro sheet that will allow you to skip the menus to perform actions. If that sounds confusing, it's because it can be to a new player. Then you have things like skill levels that you have to increase for each weapon and magic type. Normally, a skill rank in the combat skills will increase accuracy, but certain milestones will also reward a new weapon ability to perform. Magic spells will normally use MP to cast them, but weapon skills use TP to cast them, a resource that builds up the more and more you fight. Each weapon has several weapon skills that you learn as you grow in rank, with further combat depth being found in the skill chains and magic bursts. In summary, anytime you use a weapon skill, you set up the enemy to be potentially struck by a skill chain if another player or NPC uses the correct corresponding weapon skill or magic spell. The skill chain chart is, once again, something that you will have to look up online to get a better understanding on. When I first played the game back on the Xbox 360, it felt like it was really difficult to learn everything the game had to offer, especially since I played all by myself. Speaking of which, thankfully the difficulty of combat has been reduced over the years, as this used to be one of the hardest games to play in terms of difficulty, at least if you try to be a solo player. Let me explain. Back when Final Fantasy XI was more populated, the game encouraged you to have a party of up to around 6 players at all times. The game was playable by yourself until around level 15 to 20, at which point even normal enemies you would encounter would literally be too tough to fight on your own. You would know enemies were too powerful by checking their difficulty rating. But even when something was indicated as an easy target back then, monsters that were considered weak could easily kill you. Even worse, during the early days, anytime you were defeated in combat, you would lose experience points, and if you lose enough experience points, you could actually level down. Luckily, as the population settled over the years, the difficult nature of the game was toned down. You no longer lose experience until level 30, and even if you do lose experience, it's really not as big of a deal as it used to be. Gaining levels is now much easier to do, and progression is also much easier as they introduced NPC allies that can fill out your party, called trusts, that you can summon to help you in combat at any time. So while the game's difficulty can still be thought of as a relatively harder experience than most games, it has gotten much easier than it used to be. Still though, a lot of the game is still relatively hardcore, which means, more or less like everything else in this game, you are going to need a guide pulled up at all times to really understand what you are doing. Going back to exploration and questing, the game has an incredibly minimal UI presence. Everything needs commands typed into the chat to really be able to start. Things like quest icons that show if an NPC has a quest for you is noticeably absent here. Maps show information but feel like they still don't give enough information to really give the player a sense of direction. I understand the game at the time was developed this way to give a better sense of exploration and roleplay, since in a design sense, this encourages players to talk to every NPC they come across to gather information, quests, items, etc. The problem is that the genre has evolved past this design philosophy, and while some players like me can appreciate this sort of gameplay style, it's incredibly jarring to a new player. The new player experience is brutal since almost no direction is given to new players. Let me give you an idea of how tough things can be if you are just now diving into 11. So one of the jobs I wanted to unlock is the Samurai. From my starting area of Bastok, I needed to walk to Selbina, take a boat to Norg, and talk to a specific NPC, and at least be level 30. No sweat so far. The quest given to me for the Samurai job is to retrieve 2 special items. One item, I have to go to a map I've already been to, find an enemy, and get an item. Luckily, I can teleport to that map, so that saves me a good bit of walking. I check the guide for the quest, and it tells me I need to head to an area called the Sanctuary of Zeta. Okay, sounds easy. So I start looking up guides on how to get there, and, well, an hour or so goes by of me just trying to find out how the hell I get to this map, so eventually I just start walking from map to map in the hopes that I find it. Eventually I find this website that shows me the whole game world, so I figure out how to get to the Sanctuary of Zeta. However, once I get there, the enemies start killing me, so back to square one. From this point, I head to Juno to obtain a mount by completing the quest that allows me to even use mounts, which is crazy to even think. So I get a mount, ride to the Sanctuary, fight the enemy holding the item that I need, and then head back to the Samurai NPC, only to be told that I have to wait several hours in real life until I can fully complete the quest.
I've wanted it so fucking bad. I just can't do it. I can't take this shit no more, man.
Other activities in the game include the professions, which in 11 is pretty confusing at first. Once again, unless you have a guide detailing all of the recipes for all the items you can create, it can be a bit of a mess, but it does grow on you. Crafting in 11 begins with collecting crystals that represent a specific element. Once you have the crystals, you also have resource gathering professions like fishing and woodworking.
Are you kidding me?
Finally, once you have the materials you need, you can then begin crafting in the many different professions. There is alchemy, bone craft, cloth craft, goldsmithing, leather craft, smithing, and synergy. If you have the recipe and items in your inventory, you can simply select synthesis in the main menu and begin to craft the item. Crafting items will begin to increase your skill level in that profession. Yes, this also does have skill ranks. With the higher the skill level, the more recipes you have access to. PvP is also in Final Fantasy XI, and from the gameplay I've seen, it seems pretty interesting, if not a little bit clunky, just because of the combat system. But still, it's something I'd be interested in at least trying at some point. However, from what I've read on most servers, it can be quite a bit tough to get a full PvP group together, but it was at least worth mentioning that 11 does have PvP, even if it's pretty barren. 11 also sports a slight housing system within the Moogle House feature, where you can grow crops, interact with your own personal Moogle, and decorate the home with different furniture that you can earn during events or even craft. There is also chocobo raising, mount collection, monster management, as well as a slew of other minigames, and of course there is endgame activities like world bosses, dungeons, job mastery grinding, gear grinding, etc. 11 has 18 years worth of content and counting, with updates still coming in to this day, even if they are really small. It also has a really solid soundtrack composed by various composers, including the legend himself, Nobuo Uematsu. The graphics, while dated, still look relatively satisfactory for 2020 standards, and to top everything off, the game does support add-ons to fix a lot of the problems that I covered earlier in the video. Well, I think I've gone on long enough with everything this game has to offer. Let's go ahead and get to my final thoughts. Final Fantasy XI has a plethora of content to experience in its 18-year-old age. Trust me when I say there is definitely always something to be doing in the game. Sporting 22 different jobs, Final Fantasy XI has a nice variety of classes to choose from, and with the different varieties of weapons, sub-jobs, and customization options, you can play a truly unique character. As we all know with small old communities, they tend to be really welcoming, and Final Fantasy XI's community is no exception. One of the best ways to truly experience the game is to join a link shell, which is essentially this game's guilds, and make some friends to play with. The game has a grand feeling of accomplishment. Anytime you get something done that was difficult or took a long time to do, you always feel accomplished for doing it. I know I felt that way once I finally unlocked the samurai. With tracks composed by Nobuo himself, the game's soundtrack is an absolute dream to listen to when playing the game, especially as a Final Fantasy fan, which leads to my next point. If you are a huge Final Fantasy fan, this game has a ton of callbacks and nods to previous titles. If you love the world of Final Fantasy, you will like this game. Lastly, the game has a long-standing storyline that may pique your interest if you are willing to pay attention to it. Just don't quote me for saying this game has an amazing storyline or anything. As you could probably tell from my earlier complaints, the game has some really outdated design flaws that were really never changed during its initial release. For one, the UI and menu navigation is pretty terrible, and while yes, there are add-ons that fix some of these design flaws, it doesn't excuse the fact that this was the initial vision of the game, and it hasn't changed for the better. The early game is probably one of the worst experiences I have seen for new players. I get that the game was made in the early 2000s, but it could use a better tutorial system to help ease players into the game without having a wiki guide pulled up at all times. Speaking of the wiki, yes, no joke, you will absolutely need guides pulled up when playing the game if you hope to get anywhere, since a lot of the quests and gameplay features are just not explained very well. While the game does get updates monthly, the updates that do come are pretty small. There was recently a new storyline campaign added, but I think some might be waiting on a full expansion since it's been quite a number of years since the last one. Personally, I'm not sure if there will ever be another expansion for the old title, but one can hope. Lastly, like Final Fantasy XIV, I still don't understand why Square Enix can't understand that their sign-up and subscription payment website is incredibly ass backwards. Most players are going to try to buy the game, sign up, read all these menus, and give up probably halfway through. It needs to be updated. It shouldn't be so needlessly complex just to play an online game. That goes for the Play Online launcher too, which essentially has the same problems as their sign-up website. Well everyone, those are my thoughts on Final Fantasy XI. I think the game is worth at least giving the 14-day trial a shot, since I think every MMORPG fan should see where a lot of the gameplay features started that are in other MMORPGs. That is, if you can get past the convoluted sign-up process. I want to recommend a few websites and YouTube channels as well if you do plan on playing the game, as they were great helps for me. All of those links will be in the description below. I hope they help. For those that made it this far into the video, are you playing Final Fantasy XI? Leave a comment down below. I really want to hear about people's experience with this game. If you want to support my content, please consider giving this video a like, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. All my other social media sites like Twitch, Twitter, and Discord are in the description below as well, so I encourage you to follow me at those sites, especially Twitch. I've been live streaming a lot lately, and I did live stream playing Final Fantasy XI. Well, thanks everyone who watched this video, and I will see you in the next one.